Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello everyone, welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me tonight is Richard Dolan, which some of y'all might be familiar with his books, while others might be familiar with guest appearances he's done on Sci-Fi, and I believe he was also in the UFO Files and some other shows as well. Now, one of his books, he had a series out. I had it just a minute ago about national security. UFOs in the national security state, which I'm not sure how many books he's got in that series, but we can ask him in a minute. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. Today we're here to talk about a book he's got out called After Disclosure. Actually, it's AD, After Disclosure. Now, I can't read the smaller print in this, but it seems to say, when the government finally reveals the truth about alien contact. Now, I've read this book personally myself, and I would definitely recommend the book. It's got a lot of speculation, naturally, being as to how we haven't had disclosure yet. But this speculation is based on historical fact and on his many years of research with UFOs and the government, with the national security state. I'm sure he's been in a position to get all the goods on this here. And it's kind of given him a feel, along with some of the people he's talked to and he's interviewed, to be able to say, this is what's most likely to happen. And there's more than one case scenario in the book. And one of the things that I really loved about the book was that it caused you to think, what are some of the other scenarios that are not covered in the book? And, that's just always something good to be able to run down, maybe jot on a piece of paper and, use it later for whatever purpose. So I really enjoyed it. Richard, I want to thank you for coming on my show today.
Thank you, Royce, for having me on. It's a pleasure. Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Wait a second.
Oh, right there.
I do apologize for that. I told you earlier about the rain. My back ain't the only thing it gets to. It gets to my lungs to mold out.
Oh, that's awful. That's awful.
I do apologize. I usually try to hit the mute button, but sometimes if it hits me right while I'm speaking, well, I can't get to the mute button right away. So
you have no control over that.
I do ask for a little understanding with that. I have got some medicine on the way for it. It just ain't got here yet. At any rate, it's my first time to have you on my show. I've sat here and watched you on TV. You had a lot of interesting things to say. I know that when you're on TV, you're kind of limited to what you can say. They don't give you a big window of time.
Oh, that's
and
for
they
sure.
got specific things they want you to cover. So now you're going to have a chance to try and cover some things that's, a little more in depth. I hope we have a chance to. And if we don't, I'm pretty sure if you're going to have time in the future and you enjoy your time here tonight, we can always try some more for a future date. But for right now, let's delve into this book. Mm-hmm. How exactly did you and Bryce Zabel come about, getting interested in writing this here book?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I've been researching and writing about UFOs since the 1990s. I got into it in the early 90s. I've been published since 2000. And my approach to the UFO phenomenon has always been more or less political. I backed into the UFO field, as I often say, through the study of history and politics. Before I did UFOs, I was studying U.S. national security strategy in the Cold War years. And then I became obsessed with UFOs, and I just thrown the rest of my life into this subject. As a result of doing historical work, that brings me into issues dealing with a cover-up. Is there a cover-up? I would ask myself, and the answer, I think, is yes, there certainly appears to be one. It certainly has seemed to me that looking through declassified U.S. government documents that there is indeed a reality going on that the United States military has encountered, and that for various reasons U.S. government representatives have declined to give any credence to publicly. What you find out is that privately and in the classified levels, they take this topic quite seriously. So that's been my reality in studying this, and really over the last decade, I've noticed an evolution in my own thought, which has made me increasingly wonder about, well, what happens if the truth on this topic actually were to ever come out? Because of course, if you believe that the UFO phenomenon is real, and if you believe that there's a cover-up, and to me the answer is yes to both of those, then I think it's not an unnatural thing to ask yourself, well, we got to end this secrecy, and what's going to happen? How will that change the world? And that was really the genesis of the book AD After Disclosure. I hooked up with Bryce Zabel because Bryce, who was and is a television producer, was very interested in my history books, UFOs and the National Security State. He wanted to do a TV treatment of them. Bryce is the guy who created and produced the TV show Dark Skies back in the late 1990s, which was and is still a great show. And that's how we got started to talk to each other. But what we realized, and this is in over the winter of 2010 into 2011, is that right? Yes. 09 to 010, sorry. We originally conceived this book back then. We realized that we had a strong interest in this whole topic of disclosure. I wasn't the only one who was wondering about it. He was too. And we just decided to have at it. We pretended we were like a think tank and laid out the book and really asking two fundamental types of questions. Question number one is, can UFO secrecy ever end? If it did end, how would it likely end? And then question number two would be, what next? What happens then? And we try to handle both of those not in a utopian way, not in a wish fulfillment way, but really trying to look in a hard, cold way at our society, at our world, and to, deal with these issues. In terms of the first issue, it's a very easy thing for someone to say, well, why do you even think UFO secrecy will ever end? It hasn't ended yet. What makes you so sure that it's going to happen now? And that's a fair question. But we felt that it's going to end. I've often said it's kind of a paradox. It's impossible for it to end, but it's inevitable that it's going to end. And I would say it's impossible because the groups that have this secret, and there are individuals, and they are deeply, deeply ensconced in the classified world, they have no motivation, they have no incentive ever for giving this secret up. None, as I see it. That's true. And so the question would be, well, what makes you think it's going to happen now? Well, the reason I think it's going to be inevitable anyway is because those secret keepers aren't the only factor in the equation. Let's not forget, there are these other beings who are behind the UFO phenomenon, although they don't seem to have been all that interested in outing themselves either, to be honest with you. But then the third factor in the equation is us, our society, which is changing so radically, so rapidly. We're not recognizable from even 20 years ago. I ask myself, what are we going to look like as a society in another 20 years?
Oh, God, I look back when I was in high school, and I'm like, I don't recognize everything either.
No, right, exactly. And, 20 years ago, we were a world that was just starting up with the Internet. I mean, just bare bones beginning. In fact, there wasn't even a World Wide Web 20 years ago. There were just bulletin boards and things like that. And so we've really transformed in our ability as a world to communicate with each other, to get information out, and all of this. And we're obviously not done. We're in the midst of this revolution. So I'm sorry
about that. I was say you go into detail about that in your book. The upcoming changes that are going to happen, whether disclosure happens or not. There's many advances that you foresee in the future.
That's right. I believe, two quick ones that I think are, if I had to guess what my best bets were for causing disclosure, it would either be smartphones or WikiLeaks. I would say it's one of those. And both of those are symptoms of the current world that we live in. I mean, neither of those were possible even 10 years ago because we didn't have the technology, we didn't have the global infrastructure really to support them. But we do now, and here they are. And smartphones, for example, everyone now just about has got a nice camera on their phone and a halfway decent video camera. Even 3-4 years ago, I didn't have a good video camera on my own phone. This is a very new development. What I think is happening is we're seeing more and more people shooting halfway decent UFO videos. Now, none of those have made the breakthrough into being legitimate news, admittedly, and there are hoax videos for sure. But I really believe that we are on the cusp of something hitting, I call it like hitting the sweet spot, like in a baseball game where that ball just goes out of the park. You get lucky. So, in other words, an event where you might have 5 or 10 or 15 or 100 people at an event capturing something on their phones, and it goes viral. And let's say it's a good sighting.
Something totally unexpected.
Exactly. And not only that, but how far away are we from having night vision on our phones or infrared or other types of detection technologies that we probably aren't even thinking about right now, but we're going to get them. So our ability to capture, record, and transmit data is just going through the roof. And then the other possibility that I think could cause a disclosure would be some kind of WikiLeaks type of event. You know, whether people like or don't like what WikiLeaks does, whether you consider it legal or not, is irrelevant because groups like that are not going away. We're in a situation where inside information can be and is being leaked to the rest of the world, like it or not. And some of that, I think, will include UFO data. In fact, a couple of years ago, Julian Assange of WikiLeaks hinted very strongly that they did have UFO information there, and another high-level WikiLeaks person said they had the equivalent of like a nuclear bomb of information, which they haven't released. Now, I don't know if that's related to UFOs or not, but I do believe that there is UFO data that is classified, and I think it's a matter of time before it comes out. So something like that, or some other unexpected development, maybe something that I haven't even been able to imagine. But I think we're moving really fast in this world today, and something will come out that will force the hand. This is the key. It will force the hand of the secret keepers. The secret will never come out voluntarily. It'll only come out once we as a society are in a position to force it out.
Well, I can tell you one thing that comes to my mind that would definitely, I don't see how they could cover this one up, and that's if, well, we already had UFOs crash at Roswell, Aurora, Texas, Bentwaters, and, well, you know, all over the place, basically. Right. But what if one of them crashed right dead smack into the White House?
Well, that would be
hard to cover up, wouldn't it?
I certainly would agree with that. You know, there have been a number of cases over the years where I think we were very close to having something break through. You know, think of something like the Phoenix Lights, which was 1997.
Yes.
Seems like so long ago. It was 15 years ago. But if that display had happened a few hours earlier in the day, that might have done it, you know? Or if people in 1997 had been able to record the original object that was seen flying across the state, and by all witness accounts, that was a very impressive object, including seen by the governor, Fife Symington, which we only learned about many years later. So, in other words, I think that we're close. I mean, we've had a few close calls.
Yeah, like Stephenville.
Stephenville was another one. You know, we're just, these events do happen, and they happen actually all the time. If someone wants to know how many UFO sightings are going on, go to the National UFO Reporting Center on the web, and they publish over 5,000 sightings a year. 5,000 a year. That's U.S. and basically North America. Admittedly, most of them have not been investigated. They're what you call raw reports. But read through them sometime. Some of them are quite interesting, quite compelling. I've investigated a handful of them over the years, and the ones that I've looked into I thought were legitimate. So there's a lot of activity going on, without a doubt. And I just think it's a matter of time before something big happens. And this isn't 1990, and it sure isn't 1950. We've got capabilities as a society to capture this information in ways that just were not ever possible. So yeah, I think something's going to force a hand. And then once it does, that's when
all the floodgates are going to come open. Well, not all of them, but you know what I mean.
There's going to be a real battle royale, and it's going to be, on the one hand, a whole lot of people who are going to be demanding the truth. Think Occupy Wall Street times the Arab Spring, and you'll start to get an idea. Will people want to occupy Area 51 or occupy Wright-Patterson Air Force Base? I really wonder. So you'll have that on the one side, a lot of people wanting answers, and on the other side, just because the basic secret's out doesn't mean that the CIA is going to just walk away from the table and say, okay, here's all the information, people. Probably not. I think the big concern they'll have is on spin, on control over this story as it develops. And they have a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit of my sympathy. After all, let's say you're the president and you've been forced into, now you have to make an acknowledgement. And what happens if you've been briefed and the briefing includes some really scary information? You have to decide, how do you tell the world about this? Like if, for example, your intelligence people confirm to you that one or more of the groups that are here don't seem to be friendly, they don't seem to be nice, and we don't really have a whole lot of control over what they do. That's a difficult thing to tell the world without people...
Or to tell the president, who's never knew the full story on UFOs, well, pardon me, sir, but there are some secret branches that have made deals with ET to abduct people and run experiments on them that some would consider torture. So I don't know how much of that you care to reveal to the public.
No, exactly. And, there are hints that something very dark, very ominous is in fact the case. There's a story that Bryce and I related about President Jimmy Carter. And I can just tell you, the source that we got on this, in my opinion, is an extremely exemplary, high-level individual. I know who this individual is personally. I've spoken to this person. And really how it came out is that in Jimmy Carter's first year in office in 1977, he did get a briefing on the ET/UFO situation. This was in June 1977. And it was not known to this individual what was said to the president, but it was known that at the end of the meeting, he was seen in his office with his elbows on his desk, his head in his hands, and he was either sobbing or in tears. So something was told him that was deeply upsetting. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it had the meaning was of evil ETs putting us in their cookbook, but it does imply that there's something bad going on. We got another account from, again, what I would consider a very, very good source that dealt with the early Reagan administration. And this was a gentleman who had a cabinet-level position in the first Reagan administration, who was, this is early on, so I'm thinking it was 1981, and was with a friend of the family, a young man at the time, who was probably about 19, 20 years old, who had grown up with this guy's family. So they were visiting. So here's a guy, he's a new cabinet member of the Reagan team, and some friends of the family are visiting, including a 19-year-old young man who was a boy and grew up with them. So the two of them are up alone at like 2 a.m. And the cabinet guy has had probably too many drinks. And that's when he loosened up a little bit and said to this young man that when he became a cabinet official, he was taken for, I believe it was more than a month, to an underground facility where he was briefed on the UFO reality, on the ET reality. And he said what upset him more than anything else is that he had a daughter to raise in this world. Wouldn't say anything more than that. So you get these hints along the way that we're dealing with a reality that is upsetting, that is disturbing. Not everybody believes this. There are people who believe that we've got benign, like Space Brothers, the Galactic Federation of Light, we're told, or the Pleiadians or whomever. But you get a lot of other indications that what we are dealing with is not all sweetness and light at all, that there's a dark side to this. So, when there's a disclosure, and I say when, not if, it's going to happen, one of the problems that I think we as a society may have to face is that not all the information we want will necessarily come out. And we may indeed, as a society, be arguing about the meaning of this for many years to come.
We're arguing about what we got already.
Well, exactly, because, again, it's not like the national security groups are just going to walk away and hand everything over. What's going to be the case is that there's going to be a very significant political battle about this. You're going to have a president, let's say, is going to have to make a decision at some point. He's going to be the guy, or she's going to be the woman who's stuck in the middle. On the one hand, you'll have basically the elite groups that put them into power to begin with, and the national security and the intelligence community and all of that on the one side. And on the other side, you're going to have basically the people who are going to be out there probably demanding truth. And, the difference between that situation and what we have now, I mean, we've got people today who want the truth on UFOs, but this topic is not a respectable or legitimate topic to talk about in the mainstream. The difference is that after disclosure, it will be. So it's going to be a lot more powerful, and it's going to be a lot more difficult just to ignore. And so where that all is going to fall out, Bryce and I certainly don't know. I don't know if anyone knows, but I think that's really what we're looking at. So one of the things that I think we tried to point out with AD after disclosure is that disclosure is really not going to solve all the problems. It's not going to answer all the questions. It will answer some questions, and it's going to leave a whole lot more unanswered. But that doesn't mean that it won't have a massive impact on our society. No matter who these other beings are, what we believe is that disclosure is going to transform our world in many, many important ways. Whether these other beings are good guys, whether they're bad guys, whether they're indifferent to our fate, whether they're more complex than we can even imagine, we still believe that the act of disclosure itself is going to open up a tremendous amount of change in human society. And, hopefully, I think for the better, for the most part, not entirely, undoubtedly. As with any revolution, and this really will be, you'll get, the good and the bad. And I'm sure that's going to happen with disclosure.
Oh, yeah, I would agree 100%. One of the big questions I was just dying to ask you, though, and I'm sure a lot of people are, is when do you think, if you were to just take a wild guess, disclosure might occur? A ballpark.
Yeah. Well, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. I don't think it's going to happen this year. I've actually never, there have been predictions for disclosure, for the last decade or more, and especially for the last 10 years, especially with since President Obama's been in office. And I have never, ever, ever, ever agreed with any of them. I thought they were all based on complete wish fulfillment. Turns out I was right.
Yeah.
but I do think it will happen. But being conservative, I would say 20 years it'll be out. I think 20 years is conservative because, frankly, our culture, our society, our technology, our whole infrastructure, I think, is going to be in a completely different place in 20 years. And by then, I think it'll be an obvious no-brainer that this is a reality. Now, it could be sooner. I mean, it could be 5 years. I mean, it truly could be 5 years or less. It could, in theory,
be tonight or tomorrow.
It could start tomorrow, yeah. And I think,
not likely, but
what's that now?
I said it's not likely to be, but I mean, like
right.
a scenario where one crashes into the White House or the Vatican, Well, then that would prompt it, but you got to ask yourself, what's the odds?
Right, exactly. But I think as we move further and further into the future, those odds do get higher. They do become more significant. So again, because our capability at capturing this and at transmitting the information increases. So 5 years is a real possibility. I think probably between 5 and 20 is more likely. But I've never been one to like to do predictions. So it's sort of ironic that we ended up doing a book that essentially is a big fat prediction. So disclosure is going to happen, people. But it really goes against my whole grain to do a prediction. I've never, ever supported people who make predictions. I just always think that's pointless grandstanding. My study has always been that of history. That's my professional training, so I'm used to looking at the past. But I don't mind that we did this book looking at the future. Again, I think we tried to be responsible. I think we tried not to engage in
speculation. Not too much.
Not. I think we tried to keep our feet on the ground. While we did some speculation, yeah, but and that's perfectly fine. I think it's fair to do speculation, but we wanted to be as responsible about it as we could, and not to be sensationalistic, and certainly not to be utopian. I may be an idealist, which I probably am, but I'm not a utopian. I don't believe that any one thing is just going to solve all of our problems, and that includes disclosure. There are people who are involved in the UFO research community, or the UFO community, whatever you want to call it, who I think have tried to give this impression that disclosure is going to solve it all. Either the higher beings that are behind this will help us out, bring us into the greater galactic community. You hear that one a lot. Or the introduction of free energy will solve our problems, and you hear that one an awful lot.
Oh, yeah.
And whereas I think that there is an energy revolution ahead after disclosure, and I'm happy to go into that with you, I don't think that's necessarily going to solve all our problems. We got a lot of things going on, and having free energy may not solve them, actually may exacerbate them in many ways. So,
that's true.
We'll have new challenges. And free, clean energy will solve some of our current problems. And let me just preface this. Why am I even talking about free energy? And here's why. Let's say the president is forced into making a disclosure statement because of the buildup maybe of a sighting that went viral, or a leak from WikiLeaks or something else. And he basically goes up there and says, well, it's our advisors have informed me that this is a real phenomenon, and that the core of this is from a society or civilization that's not from here. So that's the basic statement, that's the basic disclosure. But here's the thing, even a 10-year-old kid, if they've seen a picture of a flying saucer, they're going to know that these things do not use gasoline to fly around the sky. Whatever they use, it's not gasoline. It's not your basic fossil fuel or even jet fuel. So there's going to be an immediate speculation and analysis on what these things are. And what new people will find out is that there's been a tremendous amount of informed research done on the whole concept of electrogravitics, which has been a study now since the 1920s. There'll be a lot of people catching up, a lot of scientists catching up on force field propulsion, that is essentially anti-gravity type technologies. And then the energies that may be behind that. What's the source of energy behind UFOs? Is it the so-called zero-point energy that people talk about? Is it clean nuclear fusion? Is it something else? My point is this. Once this topic is outed, so to speak, in the world, you're going to have a global scientific community actively pursuing this solution, and we're going to get it. We're going to get a solution. And that solution may be yanked out of the classified world, for all we know, as well. They probably already have, or they may at least have, this answer. So disclosure, in other words, threatens the largest industry in the world. That's the petroleum industry.
And so the electric industry.
Absolutely. All of our current 21st century infrastructure is likely to be challenged by the disclosure of the UFO reality. And that means a lot of entrenched economic, financial, political interests. But it also means the end of an era. It means the end of the petroleum era, at least in the way that we've understood it. And if we do get access to what we might call free energy, that could be a wonderful thing. In some ways, it could be a great thing. I mean, after all, look, I think we all realize implicitly that humanity can't go on a petroleum path forever.
Right.
It's just not going to be possible for us.
Going to run out eventually.
Yes. And if we don't run out, we're going to basically trash our planet in the process. So we need something different. And I think within the UFO technology that there is an answer implicit there. So disclosure, whatever that answer is, I think is going to bring it out within a relatively short period of time. And that's revolutionary. And that could help us do certain amounts of environmental cleanup, toxic remediation. Who knows? A lot of things are possible with free energy, I would think. Of course, some of this technology could easily be weaponized.
Right.
And
which raises problems of its own.
How does one control such technologies? And yeah, it's a mess. It's a mess. So that in turn, I think, will cause political realignments. Maybe and here's something that's scary because I'm not
power shifts. Maybe.
Well, I'm not a fan of globalization the way it's starting to turn out, which is basically a couple of very small handful of elites owning all the stuff in the world. But what's going to happen is disclosure will give a strong impetus, a strong push to globalization, and it's going to have to be up to people to determine if that globalization looks like freedom or fascism. And again, I think that's what there'll be a choice on the table there. There's going to be a lot of interests who will want to use disclosure to create a kind of global police state. And we've got to be aware of that as a reality. I mean, we're already moving in that direction in so many ways around the world.
That's true. That's
elsewhere and in the U.S. We've got a world now where, you may not have every one of the emails that you've ever written, but guess what? The NSA's new Utah Data Collection Center does. They got everything you've ever written, Royce. So if you ever want to go over there and say, hey, guys, you got some of my 2003 emails, they might have them, but they'd also might say, well, it's a matter of national security, sir.
Yeah.
But we're moving to a world, I guess my point is that, in which governments know a lot about us, but we don't know a whole lot about our governments. And disclosure might accelerate that process, or if the people are on their game, we could reverse that process. I know that sounds utopian, but it's possible. If people are energized and if people give a damn, they can use the event of disclosure to demand that light be shed on the classified world that has hidden this secret. And this is going to be one of the very tricky issues of disclosure, which is simply, the president makes a statement, and there are going to be a couple of questions. One will be fear-based. It'll be like, well, who are these other beings? Do we have anything to worry about? Fair question. There may or may not be an answer. But then there'll be another set of questions, and answers will be demanded. And those questions will concern, how the heck did you guys keep this secret all these years? How have you been able to manipulate our journalistic world, the media? How have you been able to manipulate the academic and scientific communities? And they've all been manipulated. It's all been manipulated by the intelligence community. And so these questions are going to lead to more questions and more and more and more and more. And the next thing you know, they're going to be lifting up that rug, and they're going to see a whole lot of dirt and a whole lot of termites scurrying out.
Yeah.
And a lot of heads are going to roll. But the really important thing is that people will gain some insights into the real structure of the secrecy itself. And that's a good thing. And if we are able to keep that momentum going, we might be able to engage in truly genuine reforms. We might be able to force reforms. Freedom's never given. Freedom's never granted. It's always earned. It's always fought for and won. And the same thing will have to happen after disclosure, once the secret comes out. The guys at the top of our human food chain are never going to just say, oh yeah, here's all the information, people. Here's all the freedom you want. Here's a great new world. Go take it. No. People are going to have to demand it. They're going to have to get angry enough, and they're going to have to demand answers. And it'll only be out of that struggle that that's how the after-disclosure world will be resolved, by that struggle.
And it'll take time. But I wanted to mention to you, we've had a couple questions in the chat room. I thought you might want me to run by you real quick.
Sure.
One of them was, does Richard believe in the recent, and he's referring to the last year or so, disclosures by the UK government were complete and honest disclosures?
No, absolutely, I do not. Never did. The UK government and the UK media also, they're really one and the same thing, has, in my opinion, never truly done honest work in this matter. What they have claimed to have released, their so-called MOD files, are nothing more, almost every one of them, is nothing more than a raw report, which has, there's no evidence, zero evidence in any of those release files that the Ministry of Defense actually ever investigated, well, more than the smallest handful of these cases anyway. Most of them are simply letters to the government by people who've claimed to see UFOs. It's about it, and a whole lot of filler. In the early years, I downloaded every single MOD document. I've fallen a little bit behind, I admit. But I do know of the data that's in these files. And it's not that there isn't good information in there, but the only reason that the Ministry of Defense did this is simply, the best way to keep a secret is you pretend to share it. So they have all of these raw files that were a big hassle to them because people were filing freedom of information requests with the government, and it was a big bureaucratic nightmare. So they just thought, you know what? They're thinking, these are just meaningless reports anyway, but they're portraying them as this massive revelation. Here you go, people, we're giving up all of our stuff. And really, you get some nice tidbits in there.
But it was mostly pacifier material?
Yes, absolutely. There's no indication that there was ever a serious investigation done by the MOD in any of these files. And when you consider the gravity of some of the cases, I mean, not just the Rendlesham Forest 1980 case, most people, or many people know about that, but even that one alone, there's no indication in any of these release files of any true investigation the British government did, which is not credible. It's not believable. But then there was a big wave of important sightings in the early 90s, a couple of times, 1993 in particular. Really no indication that the MOD did anything. And, you have to wonder, where is the investigation, guys? So, and incidentally, British intelligence, over at places like Menwith Hill, which is a little further up in England, where you've got some really secret stuff going on. I mean, nothing ever gets out of those places, or some of these other installations. So no, I think that this is simply a pacifier.
Okay. Now, for his other question. Let's see. Does Richard put any credence in the committee of the majority or the majestic accounts of the Eisenhower meeting?
I believe that there was and is an organization that, if it may not be called Majestic or Majestic 12 now, but I think that there was, and there probably still is, yes. This is a tricky issue. There have been claims now since the mid-1980s. Leaked documents made their way to researchers at that time. They've never been authenticated. They've been debated. And since that, during the 1990s, there were massive numbers of leaked documents that came out. If you stacked them all up, you'd have a couple of inches thick. Many, many documents. I printed them all off. I read through them. They're very sophisticated. If these are fakes, then I will just say they were not done by one guy in his basement. This would be done by a team of very brilliant people with the express intention of what? Faking out the whole UFO research community? Why? These are very, very broad-ranging, diverse types of documents. And so my feeling is that they are real, and they do describe accurately, or at least, let me say, they describe in a credible way many of the aspects of the UFO phenomenon from a deep insider point of view. Now, the person mentioned Eisenhower. I don't know if they're asking, do I believe the story that Eisenhower met with aliens in 1954? He didn't mention that, but I wondered. And on that matter,
might be what he was referring to, because that might have been part of those documents.
Well, there certainly have been claims to that effect from a couple of different sources, not a lot, but a few, more than one. And at this point, all I will say is I don't know. It's possible. I would actually say it is possible, but we don't know.
Okay. Now, before we go any further, I've done you a bad misservice, Richard. We've gotten so wrapped up in talking about this fascinating book that I forgot to tell everybody that your website was at www.afterdisclosure.com, where you can get more information on this and about him and about Bryce. I really would have liked to have had Bryce on here as well, but he didn't return his email, I'm assuming, because he's a pretty busy guy. His email box is probably flooded.
Well, let me give you another email. We do have afterdisclosure.com, and that's a good site that Bryce and I have put together. I have my website, which is keyholepublishing.com. I would encourage people to go there. I have an active blog up there and a lot of other articles that I've written over the years that deal with a lot of these issues that you and I are talking about. A lot of videos and other things are on there, too. Keyholepublishing.com.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned that one. I know you mentioned it at Facebook. I should have had it on this page. I'll put it on there when I do the archives. Also, if you scroll down underneath the chat room and the call-in number, you'll see Bryce's book linked to Amazon. You can click there and go right to it and buy it. Or you could probably get to it from Keyhole Publishing as well as from afterdisclosure.com. And also, for anybody wanting to call in and ask questions, the call-in number is 832-632-7904. We still got 17 minutes remaining. I've usually given out this number by now. The man's been so fascinating, it was hard to remember anything but listening to him. I apologize for that. One of the things that got my attention about this book, Richard, was at the very top on the front of the book cover. It says here, Zabel and Dolan have brilliantly created a compelling blend of history and informed speculation that makes their exciting world seem like tomorrow's news today. Don't dare miss it. And this was written by Stan Lee, the creator of Spider-Man and X-Men. And
that's right. Yeah, that was a nice score, getting Stan Lee to endorse our book.
Yeah, I mean, the man's, well, he's got a very futuristic mind, and I would venture to guess, without even knowing him, that he probably believes we've been visited by E.T. himself, in fact. I
think he does. He was a little cagey on that. And, Bryce knows Stan, actually, and Bryce was the guy who got Stan to do that one. We each got our own connections. I had Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, so I don't feel too bad. But Bryce got Stan Lee, because they worked on a project at one point a few years ago. But I do know Stan Lee was really into our book. He thought it was a cool book, which it is. I mean, I'm proud of the book. It's a unique kind of a book. No one else has really attempted this sort of thing. And we don't pretend that we have the final word on disclosure. What we wanted to do is give a good first word. That is to open up a discussion, to get people thinking about this. Certainly, when disclosure happens, I'm sure we'll have been wrong about so many of the things that we probably have predicted. But that's okay, I feel. We just wanted to do our best to get some fresh ideas out there And again, to get people thinking about what I do believe is an inevitability. It's going to be happening.
Well, you just mentioned Edgar Mitchell, which I've had him on my show before. We talked about, his deathbed confessions from Roswell, having grew up there and people trusted him.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, I didn't get a chance to talk to him when I had him on my show. It was back when Ike came through. And what, this here part you mentioned in your book, and if I remember correctly, it happened after Ike, or I didn't hear about it till after Ike. But evidently, him and Stephen Greer had went to, the Joint Chiefs of Staffs, and
yes.
You got the name in the book. I don't remember the general's name they spoke to.
It was Admiral Thomas R. Wilson. Thomas Wilson.
Thank you for helping me out with that, because I was already wrong about the rank.
But that was a very interesting story, though, right? In fact, I was one of the key people really to help break that story and flesh it out. What happened is that I had spoken to a very high-level individual at one point who had told me a little bit about this and said that in I think it was 97, when Stephen Greer was in Washington, D.C., trying to meet with whoever would really be willing to talk to him about disclosure and the UFO reality. Well, he had with him Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14, moonwalking astronaut, 6 men to walk on the moon. So when you have Edgar Mitchell, that's going to help open a lot of doors, obviously. And they got blown off by a lot of people, but they were able to get an audience with Admiral Thomas Wilson, and this is according to my source. Source at the time actually didn't give me Wilson's name. I'll tell you about that in a second, but he did say that they met with a very high-level person in Washington who was senior member of the White House intelligence staff at the time. Turns out he was head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And they met with him, and according to my informant, they kind of freaked him out because they said, look, there are deep black, deeply clandestine programs that are managing this UFO secret, and they appear to be beyond the control of the U.S. government. They seem to be privatized. Who controls them, we don't know. We want you to know, and on behalf of the American people, to try to get some control over these programs. That was basically what they said, and he said he would look into it. And all that I was told is that 2 months later, he found the program and was denied access to it. And in fact, the people who met with him weren't even the program managers. They were the lawyers of the program, and they said, the only reason we're even meeting with you is to find out how the heck you learned about this. Otherwise, we wouldn't have given you the time of day. So that was his story. And then the only other thing that I learned was that he was deeply upset that he was denied access. He felt that he should have been granted access. And he talked about his knowledge now of technology that was not made by human hands. That was his words. So now I got this information. I didn't get a name. And then Stephen Greer wrote his book, Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, which came out about 4 years ago, I guess. And Greer outed Wilson in that. And as a result of that, I phoned Admiral Thomas Wilson. I spoke to him myself. And he got really mad at me. He got very upset with me. Because I did sort of ambush him, I have to admit. I posed as a military journalist, and had nothing to do with UFOs. And he was very willing to talk with me. And then when I broached this topic, he got very upset. Cut the conversation short. In my mind, confirmed every single thing, although he denied it, but he seemed, in my view, to be confirming everything. Basically, the upshot was this, that you have the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff who learned about this UFO cover-up, essentially, and was denied access to the program. So the question is, who is in charge? And the other thing that I'll mention, I don't know if I mentioned it in this book, in AD After Disclosure, but I will just say to you and your listeners, I have another individual, and I hate, doing all of these inside sources and leaks because you can't confirm it. No one listening can confirm it. I understand that, but I'm just going to tell you anyway because it's true. You can either believe me or not. But there's a gentleman that I've been able to chat with from time to time who was very high level at CIA for many, many years. and in fact briefed at least one U.S. president, not on UFOs, but on other important matters. This man has a lot of knowledge of UFOs and told me.
I bet I know the man.
Well, you might, but I can't tell you who he is, unfortunately, because I promised. But he has had one-on-one conversations with, by his estimate, I think he said 16 or 18, either former presidents, former heads of the CIA, or former heads of the Defense Department.
No, not him. I was thinking of somebody else.
Somebody else. Okay, well, anyway, this guy, I have the notes on this, but I think it's 18. And these conversations he had were all about UFOs. And it was definitely his conclusion that only a small handful of those individuals, of those 18, maybe 4 or so might have been briefed on the UFO matter, and the rest were not briefed, and most of those wanted to know, but they had no real knowledge. So only a very small handful of our highest official representatives really have been briefed on UFOs. There's a group, in his opinion and in my opinion, that's outside government, outside official government channels, that really runs the show.
That's what I've read on the internet and in various books that I've read before. Pretty much the governments or the presidents are on a need-to-know basis, just like that admiral was.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, this same man in another conversation, I chatted with him, and one thing I said, like everyone wants to know, I said, well, how much do presidents know? It's the obvious question that, if you get an inside guy who's brilliant and knows a few things, you want to know this answer. And he said, well, some have known more than others. He said, look, think of it this way. Presidents, they come and go. They're here for 4 years, maybe 8. Some are kind of reliable, some aren't so reliable, some are real smart, some drink, he said. Some are unstable. And I do believe he was referring to George W. Bush, who was president at that time during this conversation. In any case, he said, look, presidents come and go, but the guys running the program are lifers. They're here forever. They are not necessarily going to entrust this secret to a president. Think about what a president does. He's got to kiss the babies. He's got to meet with the dignitaries. He's got to be in front of the cameras. He's got all of these. He's got to get reelected. He's got all of these purely public political showman type roles that he's got to be. And how on earth is he supposed to be able to really, honestly, to deal with this? And the UFO secret is only one of, a large number of other very sensitive matters. It's not the only important matter in the intelligence community, right? So a president really can't manage almost any of those. They nearly all have to be delegated. And in a sense, he really can't know, because you have to have plausible deniability. It's a case where the president says, basically, to his advisors, look, I don't want to know. Just do what you have to do. I've got my own job here. I got my own things to deal with. You handle it. And I think that's the case most of the time. If a president has a particular desire and pushes enough buttons and talks to enough people and says, I need to know, he's likely to get a cursory briefing. And whether he'll get everything he needs to know, that's a whole other issue. I would guess probably not. I did have one source, and this one I don't know. I don't have the same level of confidence that I did in the other ones that I was talking. But I did have one other source who said that President Obama was briefed, but only as a courtesy to his position, and that he has no operational control over anything to do with this situation. That was almost exactly what I was told. Again, I don't know if that's true, but, I guess it's possible. I don't really know.
Right. Well, I wanted to mention that we've only got like 5 minutes remaining, and if you got any last-minute thoughts you'd like to share, now would be a good time to do it, or maybe there's something I didn't get a chance to. I got to be honest with you. I didn't get a chance to ask any of the questions I had on the list that I pulled from your book, but I think everything went just fine without them.
I hope you feel it. I enjoyed being here, and look, this is a topic where there's just so much that's fascinating. The one thing I would just want to impress on anyone listening is that whether you think disclosure is or isn't going to happen, the one thing I really want people to realize is that the UFO phenomenon, which gets laughed at, it's a big joke in the media, it's serious. It's not a big joke. When you get to the right people within the classified community, I can assure you this is taken quite seriously. But the problem is that it is the third rail of one's career. If you're in journalism, if you're in politics, you are not ever going to talk about this. It's death. It's political suicide. So the fact is that you get a whole culture developing with a terror of this topic, and the culture now reinforces the secrecy. But the fact of the matter is, UFO phenomenon is one of the best things to study if you are really interested in getting inside the matrix, so to speak. If you really want to get behind the kind of fiction that most of us are being served every day, being spoon-fed BS in your reality, if you want to get behind that, UFO phenomenon is a very good way to do it.
All righty. And while we're sitting here talking about so much to do with the government, I hope you don't mind me putting one in for Nick Redfern. But you see, the thing is, he's going to be my guest this next Tuesday, and we're going to be talking about his new books, The Pyramids and the Pentagon, the government's top secret pursuit of mystical relics, ancient astronauts, and lost civilizations, which yours is covering the more modern end, and you do talk some about ancient aliens. But, I kind of thought this here goes right in behind it, from different angles of, the government, and their involvement in the whole picture, in other words. So I thought it was appropriate to mention it.
I'm a fan and a friend of Nick Redfern. I have a lot of respect for him, awful lot of respect for him as a researcher. The thing that I've always admired about Nick is that he's fearless into what he does. He's covered so many related aspects of all this strange world that we live in. He's done UFOs, but he's done a lot of other things. And he handles everything, I feel, with integrity. I haven't always agreed on every one of his conclusions, but for me, I don't need to agree with someone to respect them or to like what they do. I think the vast majority of his work is extremely valuable, and it's just nice to know that there are other people out there who really do have integrity and who are concerned with the truth. And I firmly believe Nick is one of those people.
Oh, I would tend to agree with you 100%. I've known him for 6 years now myself, so I think I can speak after all the times we've talked that I come to the same conclusions you have.
Yeah. He's a good bloke.
Yeah. He really goes into depth in his research, too. I mean, he gives you all the names, dates, places, the whole 9 yards.
Well, he does a lot of archival research. So he's not afraid to go into archives wherever they be, whether College Park, Maryland, U.S. National Archives, or any of the presidential libraries or any other libraries. He's not afraid to travel and to go. And really, you can't do all of the research from your computer screen. You can do a lot from through the web now, but in archives, these are repositories where it's all there. You got to go there, either hold the paper documents in your hand or even go through their digital archives. But you can't usually access those unless you go there. And he's one of the few people who really travels to archival sites around the U.S. and beyond. He does good work.
Yes, he does. Well, Richard, you know what? This here topic we've covered tonight could have probably went on and it'd cover more than one show. But there's one thing I don't want to get out of here without mentioning, is I was going to tell you when I first started reading your book how I thought something like that could make a series, like what was that, Getaway or the Roswell thing that...
let me tell you, man.
But then I read on your website, or on Bryce's website, that's coming up for the very same thing.
We're working on a TV treatment of the book, absolutely. And that's one of the cool things about having a producer for a co-author. Because he's in L.A., he knows how to do it, he knows the system, and that's his ball. He's gonna get us on TV.
Well, I would love to have you come back and talk about that when it happens, or at least when it's almost about ready to happen.
Sure.
Don't mind.
Not at all. Yeah, I'd love to.
Okie doke. Well, it's 9 o'clock. We've been on here for about an hour now, and it's getting time for me to join the missus, and I'm pretty sure you got some things going on your end. We'll call this a quit until the next time, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much, Royce. What a pleasure. Enjoyed it tremendously.
Same here. I do agree. You have a good one.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye. Pardon me, folks. I was trying to hold that in. If y'all give me just 1 second. Okay. Bought myself some time. Just want to let everybody know there's going to be no show this coming Saturday. That's our 25th wedding anniversary, and we're going to be paying attention to that. However, next Tuesday, Nick Redfern will be here, and we'll be discussing the book I just mentioned. And then on September the 6th, which is that following Thursday at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time, 6 Eastern Daylight Time, I will be a guest on Conspiracies Explained. And then the Book of Transformation, Lisa Barreto, will be on my show September the 8th. I could go down the whole list, but I'll be posting it on my website tomorrow anyway. And I'm going to go ahead and call a wrap-up before I start coughing again, since I'm having a bad go tonight. But don't forget to click on the friends link and go see my friends over at, well, I wouldn't advise going to Alien UFO Community. They're not back up yet. But the Supernatural UFO and Paranormal, United Paranormal International are still up. They're great places. Give them a visit. Don't forget to visit World UFO Today. And don't forget to visit my other friends who are radio show hosts. Gary Brown with UKPN Radio, Jim Herald, JimHerald.com, Gralien Report with Micah Hanks, Ohio Exopolitics with Mark Snyder. Those are fantastic shows, a fantastic host, and I think you'll really enjoy it. And I hope to see everybody back here Tuesday, and thank you very much for coming. Y'all have a great weekend, and don't do anything I wouldn't do if you can find such a thing. And by the way, I couldn't have a show without my listeners any more than I could without my guests, so I want to thank you guys for participating. Y'all have a good one.
Bryce Zabel, because Bryce, who was and is a television producer, was very interested in my history books, UFOs and the National Security State. He wanted to do a TV treatment of them. Bryce is the guy who created and produced the TV show Dark Skies back in the late 1990s, which was and is still a great show. And that's how we got started to talk to each other. But what we realized, and this is in over the winter of 2010 into 2011, is that right? Yes. 09 to 010, sorry. We originally conceived this book back then. We realized that we had a strong interest in this whole topic of disclosure. I wasn't the only one who was wondering about it. He was too. And we just decided to have that. We pretended we were like a think tank and laid out the book and really asking two fundamental types of questions. Question number one is, can UFO secrecy ever end? If it did end, how would it likely end? And then question number two would be, what next? What happens then? And we try to handle both of those, not in a utopian way, not in a wish fulfillment way, but really trying to look in a hard, cold way at our society, at our world, and to, deal with these issues. In terms of the first issue,
speculation naturally being as to how we haven't had disclosure yet, but this speculation is based on historical fact and on his many years of research with UFOs and the government, with the national security state. I'm sure he's been in a position to get all the goods on this here, and it's kind of given him a feel, along with some of the people he's talked to and he's interviewed, to be able to say, this is what's most likely to happen. And there's more than one case scenario in the book. And one of the things that I really loved about the book was that it gave you, it caused you to think, what are some of the other scenarios that are not covered in the book? And, that's just always something good to be able to run down, maybe jot on a piece of paper and, use it later for whatever purpose. So I really enjoyed it. Richard, I want to thank you for coming on my show today.
Thank you, Royce, for having me on. It's a pleasure. Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Wait a second.
Oh, right there.
I do apologize for that. I told you earlier about the rain. My back ain't the only thing it gets to. It gets to my lungs. It's mowed out.
Oh, that's awful. That's awful.
I do apologize. I usually try to hit the mute button, but sometimes if it hits me right while I'm speaking, well, I can't get to the mute button right away. So
you have no control over that.
I do.
Okay.
Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio, where truth equals reality, and truth is often stranger than fiction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce, the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me tonight is Richard Dolan, which some of y'all might be familiar with his books, while others might be familiar with guest appearances he's done on Sci-Fi, and I believe he was also in the UFO Files and some other shows as well. Now, one of his books, he had a series out. I had it just a minute ago about national security. UFOs in the national security state, which I'm not sure how many books he's got in that series, but we can ask him in a minute. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. Today we're here to talk about a book he's got out called After Disclosure. Actually, it's AD, After Disclosure. Now, I can't read the smaller print in this, but it seems to say, when the government finally reveals the truth about alien contact. Now, I've read this book personally myself, and I would definitely recommend the book. It's got a lot of tests for a little understanding with that. I have got some medicine on the way for it. It just ain't got here yet. At any rate, it's my first time to have you on my show. I've sat here and watched you on TV. You had a lot of interesting things to say. I know that when you're on TV, you're kind of limited to what you can say. They don't give you a big window of time.
Oh, that's
and
for
they got specific things they want you to cover. So now you're going to have a chance to try and cover some things that's, a little more in depth. I hope we have a chance to. And if we don't, I'm pretty sure if you're going to have time in the future and you enjoy your time here tonight, we can always try some more for a future date. But for right now, let's delve into this book.
Mm-hmm.
How exactly did you and Bryce Zabel come about, getting interested in writing this here book?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I've been researching and writing about UFOs since the 1990s. I got into it in the early 90s. I've been published since 2000. And my approach to the UFO phenomenon has always been more or less political. I backed into the UFO field, as I often say, through the study of history and politics. Before I did UFOs, I was studying U.S. national security strategy in the Cold War years. And then I became obsessed with UFOs, and I just thrown the rest of my life into this subject. As a result of doing historical work, that brings me into issues dealing with a cover-up. Is there a cover-up? I would ask myself, and the answer, I think, is yes, there certainly appears to be one. It certainly has seemed to me that looking through declassified U.S. government documents that there is indeed a reality going on that the United States military has encountered, and that for various reasons U.S. government representatives have declined to give any credence to publicly. What you find out is that privately and in the classified levels, they take this topic quite seriously. So that's been my reality in studying this, and really over the last decade, I've noticed an evolution in my own thought, which has made me increasingly wonder about, well, what happens if the truth on this topic actually were to ever come out? Because, of course, if you believe that the UFO phenomenon is real, and if you believe that there's a cover-up, and to me the answer is yes to both of those, then I think it's not an unnatural thing to ask yourself, well, we got to end this secrecy, and what's going to happen? How will that change the world? And that was really the genesis of the book AD After Disclosure. I hooked up with